time once again for Community Forum. And we are very lucky to have back with us live in the studios this morning, David Neiwert. David Neiwert is a Seattle-based investigative journalist and Pacific Northwest correspondent for the Southern Poverty Law Center. And in addition, he is the author of several books, including And Hell Followed with Her, Crossing the Dark Side of the American Border, of Orcas and Men, What Killer Whales Can Teach Us, and here to talk about the issues around his forthcoming book, Alt America, The Rise of the Radical Right in the Age of Trump. Dave, thank you very much for coming in and spending time again with us this morning.
Always a pleasure, Mike.
So you have just submitted your book, I believe, to your publisher.
Yeah. Just in fact, I'm wrapping. I had a final chapter to write, but yeah, I got the manuscript off last week.
Very good. So talk about your new book and the motivation behind that.
Well, really, the book originally started out. I started selling this in March. We certainly had no idea that Donald Trump would win back then, but and so it was kind of hard to find a publisher for it because everybody thought, well, this book's going to come out in the summer, Trump will be a dead issue by then, right? But it didn't work out that way for them. So now it's, my publisher is very, very happy that they picked it up. Basically, the point is we've certainly been observing this over the past 15 years and longer, really since the 1990s. This sort of increasing momentum for the radical right in America. And it really picked up after the election of Barack Obama. There was this huge backlash to his election, a sort of racial backlash, that really never slowed down. In fact, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse as every year went along. This sort of increase in militia organizing, this increase in white nationalism, increases in their ranks and that sort of thing. And so, and it certainly manifested itself last January there in Oregon at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And so seeing this increase, and not only that, but it was very clear to those of us who monitor these things by January or so of 2016 that Trump was having a really powerful effect on sort of accelerating that trend. And mainly because, right-wing extremists, we've been pretty lucky in this country for most of its history in that right-wing extremism has never really caught on because one of its sort of necessary components has been always, whenever you see sort of right-wing extremism rise to power in countries, it's always under the banner of a singular charismatic figure. The right sort of needs that because otherwise they're very highly prone to internecine bickering and warfare, and they fall apart. There's always all these factions within the extremist right that not only don't get along, but these are some of the most unpleasant people on earth to begin with, and you can imagine how they are with each other too. They're constantly beating each other up, so they always have needed sort of a unifying figure, and they've just never had it. And now comes along Donald Trump, and it's it's very concerning. So yeah, that was my motive for starting to write this, and obviously since I started writing it and moved on, it's really, the trend has not changed at all. It's still accelerating upwards. We're still seeing this really increase in the ranks of right-wing extremists of various stripes, patriot militiamen, white nationalists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, Klansmen. All of these groups are gaining members. They're all gaining momentum, and it's very concerning.
So prior to Trump's involvement with the current election, running on the current election, had he had any connections to people in the extreme right?
Well, he had not so many connections. I mean, it was that he indulged their rhetoric. Remember, he started out talking about the birther conspiracy. I mean, he was right in with the middle of the conspiracy theorists all along, right from the very start. His whole candidacy was launched on the back of his prominent promotion of the idea that, President Obama was not legitimately elected because he didn't have a real birth certificate. So, and he's always been really in close with the sort of conspiracist element of the far right. Even today, even through today, I mean, he's still very closely associated with Alex Jones. And, we've seen the results of what Alex Jones can do just last Sunday, when that man walked into the pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. with a gun and fired up a round because he believed all these conspiracy theories promoted by Alex Jones that this particular pizzeria was part of a child sex abuse ring, secret nefarious ring that's run by Hillary Clinton and John Podesta. This insane stuff, provably untrue. And people, it's unbelievable how many people sucker into this stuff. Just unbelievable.
So your the title of your new book, Alt America: The Rise of the Radical Right in the Age of Trump. Alt America being a takeoff on alt right.
Yeah. So to some extent, although what I'm trying to do is, really the thesis of the book in a lot of ways is that, and this dates back to my days in the 90s covering the Patriot Movement. It was that I observed even then, and I wrote about this in my 99 book on the militia movement, that part of what they do is they sort of create this alternative universe for themselves where they are able to they create this epistemic bubble that becomes impenetrable, where they really operate and think that their worldview is that all these conspiracies and all these things are going on around them. And everything they do and everything they perceive, including all the news and day's events, they're all filtered through this prism of these conspiracy theories. And it creates a sort of extreme sense of unreality and disattaches people from reality, which also, we believe, really is what sort of enables the violence. Once you become disattached from reality, then these other people aren't human. They're just demons or, minions of the evil New World Order and are disposable anyway. So, and this is where a lot of the violence comes from. So I certainly saw this bubble forming in the militia movement in the 90s, and it just kept growing. It didn't go away. And it really became massive in 2009 with the growth of the Tea Party. The Tea Party movement essentially became this huge conduit for patriot/militia movement ideology. These constitutionalists, all of this sort of really far-right stuff became really endemic to the Tea Party. We saw it with the way the Tea Party folded in organizations like the Oath Keepers and so on and so people like that. They call themselves constitutionalists, but really they're right-wing radicals who were taking their ideas from the old racist, white supremacist, posse comitatus ideology of the 70s and 80s. I mean, that's where this constitutionalism comes from originally. That's where that's where these ideas started. And it's just been spreading. So, part of what we certainly, what I saw, the idea of Alt America was not just that, so it really became manifest, this sort of alternative universe with the rise of the alt-right. I mean, this is sort of its apotheosis, is this alternative universe that they've created. But I really wanted to wrap in and include the sort of alternative universe of the Patriots and then the Tea Party, because that was what gave birth. That was really sort of, in many ways, the basis of the alt-right that we see today. They've all merged into this gigantic alternative universe where they believe all this stuff that's just not true.
And it seems that the internet is a key platform for spreading.
Well, yeah. The internet's really sort of plays an essential role in a lot of ways. One of the things that happens on the internet, as you know, is that we lose actual human contact. When we are exchanging with people on the internet, it's really kind of a simulacrum of human interaction, and that we're just sort of exchanging words, or really at the root of it, it's just crude information, right, coming across the wires. You don't have the eye contact, you don't have the voice intonation, you don't have the body language, you don't have the actual presence of another person to remind you that you are talking to a human being. So it becomes very easy to dehumanize other people on the internet, incredibly easy. And that's really what happens to a lot of these people, is that they just stop seeing other people as human beings. They're not human beings to them. They're some kind of object that they've worked up in their head, whatever that object is, whether it's a, communist or, whatever the enemy, the other that they fear is. That's how they see these other people. So it becomes, one of the leading ethoses of the sort of alt-right and the extremist right on the internet is the activity of trolling. Trolling is really a huge thing. And trolling is really kind of that ultimate step of dehumanizing your interaction with others, where you just don't really care what they think or that they're another person. All you want to do is destroy them and humiliate them. I mean, that's what trolling's about. And trolling is really the underlying ethos of the alt-right. It's all about it being as big a troll as you possibly can. And what's more transgressive and troll-like than being a Nazi? That's their attraction. And so, unfortunately, what the alt-right has really meant has been this massive opening of huge horizons of recruitment for the extremist right, particularly among young people. They're really specifically targeting young, impressionable minds. I mean, one of the ways they do it is they do things like they organize people they go around the Pokemon Go game. How people were doing Pokemon Go gyms? Well, Andrew Anglin and his Daily Stormer mates started realizing, well, hey, we can go start handing out flyers, recruitment flyers at these Pokemon Go gyms. And they did. So, and it was an open campaign at the Daily Stormer to do this. And they do all kinds of stuff like that. They are all about, Andrew Anglin, the guy who runs the Daily Stormer, his whole push is to sort of shift the Overton window. And so what he does is he goes out there and he's as outrageous as he possibly can be, just open Nazi imagery, open racism, open misogyny, open bigotry, and open anti-Semitism. He tries to be as outrageous as he can, because what he's trying to do is get people sort of accustomed to having that language be out there, so that when the white nationalists come along with their tweeds and their suits and say, well, really, we just want to have, we just want to have a nation for white people where they don't have to put up with black people. Then that starts sounding reasonable to people, and that's how you push the Overton window. That's what they're trying to do, and so it's one of the things about the far right in America for most of its history is that it's been incredibly stupid. You're just dull, behind the times, really focused fetishizing the past. And so that really limited their appeal. The alt-right is not like that. They are totally focused on the future. They're very witty. They're funny, if you consider, racist humor to be funny. But they have a lot of wit and humor going on in their stuff. It's all about, being as transgressive as you possibly can. And it's really wired. It's white supremacy, rewired, rebranded for the 21st century.
So one of the ideas that you had emphasized in your recent article in Mother Jones, that I cannot find the title for here, was
how Trump mainstreamed the racist right was the title of the story. Radical right, I'm sorry.
Was the idea that by Trump taking these ideas and putting them up on Twitter, that he was mainstreaming a lot of ideas that hadn't been brought to the mainstream prior to that. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, he was doing things. He was doing a lot of wink and nod gestures in the direction of these white nationalists. Like their mascot is Pepe the Frog. And he put last October, or a year ago, he put up on his Twitter account an image of himself as Pepe the Frog, even though Pepe is a racist alt-right mascot, or at least has become that. He didn't start out life that way, but and that's just an example of it. What he does more often is he'll retweet things from the White Genocide account, which is White Genocide is a white nationalist hashtag that's all about the idea that diversity is code for white genocide. That's their mantra. And he's been retweeting very subtly and doing these sort of encouraging things. What he does as much as anything is that when he's confronted about this stuff, he does this sort of interesting little two-step where, like with David Duke, where he'll go, well, I don't want to denounce him right off. He'll make excuses for, well, I don't want to. And then when the sort of uproar comes up, then he'll say, oh, yes. Well, I disavow them. And he does this quick, I disavow them thing, and that's it. I have nothing to do with them. Even though these people are clearly inspired by him. And one of the things that, look, there's always been a certain number of radical right extremists who have gone and supported mainstream politicians from time to time. I remember actually that David Duke did support George W. Bush back in 2000, rather briefly, but it was one of those things, and it caught my attention. But he was the only one, right? He was the only right-wing extremist that did that. Very few. But Trump is just astonishing in the utter unanimity of the radical right and closing ranks behind him. Every white nationalist group, every neo-Nazi group, every Klan group, every Patriot militia organization or Patriot militiamen, they're all huge Trump supporters. And so he's clearly saying things to them that appeal to what their agenda is, right? Usually you would think that if you've got somebody, if you're a politician and you've got people out there beating up minorities and chanting your name or leaving swastika graffiti with your name on people's walls, you would think you would want to say something about that. You would think you would want to say, no, these people are wrong to think that I have anything to do with inspiring them. Instead, all we've gotten from Trump is I disavow that. That was his. He said something on 60 Minutes about, well, I would tell them to stop. And that was it. That's all we've heard from him on the subject. Yet in the first 10 days after the election, we have over 900 hate crimes that have been documented by the Southern Poverty Law Center that occurred just in the first 10 days after the election. And a huge number of these were people, were intimidating minorities by chanting Trump or yelling Trump, Trump. The name Trump comes up all the time in these hate crimes. And that was just in the first 10 days. I think, we've been keeping track of it. I think we've got an update coming up Monday or Tuesday that's going to put the number at well over 1,000. And, that's just insane. During a normal week in the United States, we will have about 150 hate crimes a week is your standard rate. So when it suddenly goes up to 700, something's going on. And especially when you have all this very clear connection to the election in terms of the rhetoric that's being deployed and the sort of logic of these crimes, what's motivating these crimes.
So, and you know of that through your work at the Southern Poverty Law Center?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Because there have been some people that challenge the increase in hate crime, saying that, no, that's just that the mainstream media is covering that more now. It's the same amount that's always.
No, if you go to the SPLC website, we have a full detailing of the 900 plus. Trust me, it's a phenomenal increase. And yes, there are some anti-Trump incidents thrown in here too. Let's see, I think the count after 10 days was actually 867 specifically hate crimes that the SPLC had counted in those first 10 days, or incidents, violent incidents. And of those, there were 23 that were anti-Trump. So yes, there are some anti-Trump crimes thrown in there, but it's just dwarfed into insignificance. So
what has been the mainstream media's role in Trump getting to be president and its response since he has become president-elect? I know that one of the issues that has come up is the questioning of whether if you just ignore them, they will go away concept.
Yeah. Obviously the press has a huge role in this. I can't think of an election where they did a more horrible job of actually, the entire coverage of this election was about the horse race and about the sort of whatever peculiar scandals might surround the candidates rather than policy. I believe it was not Pew, but there was a study recently released on media coverage of the election, and they found that policy was actually, for the two candidates, comprised less than 10% of all the coverage. It was all horse race stuff, and that, of course, favored Trump because everybody was fixated on Hillary's emails. Thank you, James Comey. And those are, an issue. But the press is still doing the same thing. They're not really pressing. They're not paying attention, for one thing, to these hate crimes, and certainly they're not pressing Trump on this issue. They're sort of letting him slide, and a lot of that is that there's this meme in the media that's been put out by the Trump people that is something that I've been dealing with in reporting on the radical right for years, which is this idea that, well, Trump doesn't want to say anything because if he did that, he'd just be giving them the free publicity that they want, and we're better off to just ignore them and they'll go away. And what I can tell you is that from years and years of doing this, that's exactly how they thrive, is by giving them a vacuum to operate in. That's what they prefer, the silence. They not only they interpret social silence, the silence from the rest of the community, as approval, as a sign that the white people are out there really behind them. It's the same sort of dynamic you get with hate crimes. Most hate criminals really believe that hate crimes perpetrators believe that they're doing so on behalf of and in defense of the community, and so the community is actually secretly behind them. And this is why it's so critical when hate crimes occur for the communities to stand up and say, no, this is not acceptable. You're not doing this at the community support at all. And to sort of undermine the story they tell themselves, justifying themselves. And so, yeah, when you let the radical right sit in this little dark corner and just grow, pretty soon you got a monster growing in that corner. They don't shrivel up and go away. They do exactly the opposite.
And I believe in your article in Mother Jones, how Trump took the hate groups mainstream. You'd done a bunch of investigation into actual content from blogs and tweets, and one of the things you included in there was from the Daily Stormer, quote, "Our glorious leader and ultimate savior has gone full wink, wink, wink to his most aggressive supporters," end quote.
Yeah, that's a classic example. They certainly saw what Donald Trump did as a form of encouragement. That he was out there. They fully believed that he was actually on their side. He just couldn't. If he would actually do any denunciations, they were so anodyne that they would say, "Well, that's just what he had to do to make the press happy," But they can sit there and justify themselves all day when Trump does these sort of anodyne disavowals, because it doesn't really tell them that he's disavowing them. They interpret it exactly the opposite. And that's what's been happening. These groups clearly believe that Trump is in their corner. He has clearly empowered them, and they are recruiting at a rate that, is frightening and astonishing. I think America really needs to be ready for the wave of what's going to follow.
We are talking with David Neiwert. He is a Seattle-based investigative journalist and Pacific Northwest correspondent for the Southern Poverty Law Center and author of the forthcoming book, Alt America, The Rise of the Radical Right in the Age of Trump. In addition to your books, how else can people follow your work?
Well, really, most of the stuff that I write, I post at the Southern Poverty Law Center's blog, Hate Watch. And you can just go to their website, splcenter.org, and find Hate Watch there. I do have a personal blog that I cross-post most of those things at. It's called Orsinus, and it's at dneiwert.blogspot.com. So.
Well, with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time again with us this morning.
Always a pleasure, Mike.